In a potential shift in strategy, Russia is reportedly considering a limited pause in its aerial attacks on Ukraine to reduce potential economic sanctions from the United States. According to a report by Bloomberg, the Kremlin is exploring a temporary halt in drone and missile strikes, citing officials familiar with the ongoing discussions. This potential truce, however, depends on Ukraine's agreement to terms laid down. The move comes as U.S. President Donald Trump intensifies efforts to end the war, now entering its fourth year. U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff met with the Russian president earlier today, with the Kremlin stating that the 3-hour Putin-Witkoff-Ukraine talks were quote-unquote constructive. Putin's aide, meanwhile, told journalists in Moscow, and I'm quoting here, a quite useful and constructive conversation took place, quote-unquote, adding that besides Ukraine, Russia-U.S. strategic cooperation was also discussed.
On our part, in particular on the Ukrainian issue, some signals were transmitted. Corresponding signals were also received from President Trump.
And according to the Bloomberg report, an air truce could serve as a concession from Moscow to avoid further U.S. penalties, as the possibility of a full ceasefire remains slim, especially given that Russian forces continue to advance on the ground. According to reports, Russian forces now hold about 20% of Ukraine's territory. On the battlefront, Russia has conducted fresh strikes on Ukraine's Zaporizhia region. Ukraine says Russian forces carried out 567 attacks over the last 24 hours across 16 settlements in the region. And according to the Ukrainian officials, Russian strikes killed at least 2 people and injured 10 others in the region.
To see a full restoration.
And according to Ukrainian media, Trump's Ukraine envoy is expected to visit Kiev in the coming days for talks with President Zelensky. Zelensky, meanwhile, said on social media that he had a productive call with Trump, where they spoke about the ongoing hostilities and U.S. policy towards Russia. There has been a spike in Russian aerial attacks in Ukraine in recent weeks. In July alone, Russia reportedly launched over 6,000 drones into Ukrainian territory. That's the highest monthly total since the war started in February 2022. Moscow, remember, has made it clear that any long-term settlement would need to include Ukraine's recognition of Russia's control over Crimea and 4 additional regions. Russian and Chinese warships fired their final shots in the Pacific as their joint naval drills entered the last phase. The Maritime Interaction 2025 exercise had artillery fire, anti-submarine warfare operations and aerial reconnaissance, with both sides vowing deeper cooperation at sea. Take a look. A new study has raised serious alarm over Taiwan's energy security in the face of a possible Chinese blockade. According to a report by the Washington-based Center for Strategic and International Studies, Taiwan would run out of natural gas within just 10 days if China were to cut off maritime access. The island's coal reserves would stretch to about 7 weeks, and oil stocks would only hold out for roughly 20 weeks. Now, these numbers basically highlight a grim reality. According to a report by the think tank, Taiwan relies heavily on imported fuel. Nearly 98% of its energy needs come from foreign sources, while liquefied natural gas alone fuels around 40% of Taiwan's power generation. If shipping lanes were blocked, the energy system, along with hospitals, factories, data centers, would be thrown into chaos almost immediately. The report comes amid rising tensions in the Taiwan Strait. Recent Chinese military drills have mimicked blockades and strikes on key infrastructure. China recognizes Taiwan as part of its own territory, and Beijing has on multiple occasions stated that it will incorporate Taiwan by the year 2027. And to assess the risks, CSIS analysts simulated 26 different war game scenarios. And the findings revealed that a blockade would not be a clean or easy operation for China. Interestingly, most simulations led to high casualties and often triggered wider regional wars. And in the most severe scenarios, US forces struck mainland China, while Chinese missiles hit American military bases in Guam and Japan. The report warns that a blockade would drain China's military strength and alert other countries, likely triggering global pushback. It also cast doubt on the idea that Taiwan would be or could be supported through a strategy similar to what the West used in Ukraine. The report argues that such an approach would not be enough. China's naval chokehold would be far too tight and Taiwan's fuel demand far too great. Even in cases where US convoys broke through the blockade, the effort came at steep costs. Many missions faced direct combat with Chinese forces, making them high risk and unsustainable. What exactly are we to make of all of this? It's clear here that Taiwan's energy vulnerability is a critical weak point, and a blockade scenario would basically and could quickly spiral into an all-out global conflict. Japan paused this morning to remember one of the darkest days in human history, the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. On the 80th anniversary of that devastating day, a ceremony was held with around 55,000 people, including dignitaries from 120 countries and regions, at exactly 8:15 a.m. local time. The moment the bomb exploded over Hiroshima, the crowd observed a minute of silence, honoring the tens of thousands who lost their lives instantly and in the months that followed. The Prime Minister of Japan addressed the gathering after placing a wreath at the Peace Memorial. He urged world leaders to recommit to nuclear disarmament and strengthen the global non-proliferation framework.
The current security environment is becoming increasingly severe. However, it is precisely because of this that we must make every effort to realize a world without nuclear war and ultimately a world without nuclear weapons under the framework of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which serves as the cornerstone of the international nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime.
The uranium bomb dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, killed 78,000 people instantly. And by the end of that year, radiation exposure had brought the death toll to approximately 140,000. 3 days later, the US dropped a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki. Decades later, nuclear weapons remain a looming threat. Despite being used only twice in warfare, the destructive potential continues to cast a long, dangerous shadow. Experts and survivors alike warning that the risk of nuclear conflict is now higher than it has been in decades. One such voice is that of atomic bomb survivor Masako Wada, who spoke about the dangers of ignoring history.
Armed states and their allies should recognize the fact that due to their insincerity and arrogance, the entire human race is on the brink of nuclear war. In today's unstable world, the risk of nuclear weapons use is the highest since the end of the Cold War.
And according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, there are more than 12,000 nuclear bombs across the world. So from the recent Russia-US nuclear saber-rattling to the US strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, the nuclear shadow is far from gone. Even 80 years later, Hiroshima reminds the world that the nuclear threat still looms. India is ramping up its military defenses with a major new wave of weapon purchases and system upgrades. The government has cleared defense procurement proposals worth 67,000 crore rupees, or around $8 billion, to enhance operational capability of the armed forces. This strategic move comes amid an increasing focus on modernizing India's warfighting capabilities across land, air and sea. The Defence Acquisition Council, led by the Defence Minister Rajnath Singh, has given the green light for a range of new acquisitions and modernization plans for the Army, the Navy and the Air Force. The approved proposals will significantly boost India's ability to deter and respond to threats across multiple terrains and theatres. For ground operations, the Army will soon receive thermal imaging night sights for the drivers of BMP infantry combat vehicles. These advanced devices will basically enable Indian mechanized infantry units to operate effectively in complete darkness, enhancing both mobility and battlefield awareness during the night missions. And the Indian Navy is also on track to improve its undersea warfare capabilities. It will induct compact autonomous surface vessels, specifically designed for anti-submarine operations. These unmanned craft are designed to help detect, track and eliminate submarine threats without risking lives. Alongside this, the Navy's missile systems will be seeing a major boost. New fire control systems and launchers for BrahMos missiles have been cleared, and the Barak 1 missile system is set for an upgrade, improving defense against the incoming threats. The Indian Air Force is also preparing to deploy cutting-edge radars in the mountains. And these high-performance sensors will reinforce surveillance along India's high-altitude borders, where terrain often limits visibility. All three services will also benefit from the acquisition of long-endurance, remotely piloted aircraft. These medium-altitude drones can stay airborne for extended hours, carry multiple weapons and operate deep into enemy territory. And in addition to the new acquisitions, the DAC also approved long-term maintenance and servicing plans for key Air Force platforms, including the C-17 and C-130J transport fleets. While the S-400 air defense system will now be covered under an annual maintenance contract, ensuring readiness at all times, these acquisitions and proposals and approvals coming at a time when India is testing powerful new indigenous missiles. The Defence Research and Development Organization has successfully conducted back-to-back trials of the Pralay missile, a quasi-ballistic weapon that can carry a 1-ton warhead and strike targets between 150 and 500 kilometers away. Further, India is developing a bunker-buster version of the Agni-5 missile equipped with a hypersonic deep-penetration warhead. This weapon could destroy enemy command centers buried beneath fortified layers of rock and concrete. In fact, the acquisition and development of new missiles reflects a decisive push towards military self-reliance and battlefield superiority, enhancing the operational capabilities of the armed forces across all domains.